They called her forgotten, an exile, living alone in the woods where no soul dared to wander. But on the night the storm broke, fate sent a wounded king to her door, a vampire whose enemies would burn the world to ashes to see him fall. What began as a knock in the dark would ignite a war of shadow and fire, where one woman would discover she was never meant to hide, but to rise. The storm had come from nowhere. The sky was split with jagged streaks of lightning, and thunder rattled the valley with a violence that felt personal. The forest swayed beneath the gale, branches clawing at one another, leaves scattering like frightened birds. In the heart of this chaos, nestled in a clearing few had set eyes on in decades, stood a cabin of weathered wood and stone. Its roof groaned under the weight of wind, but its hearth still glowed with steady warmth. Inside, Selene sat cross-legged before the fire, her fingers wrapped around a chipped clay mug. The tea had long since gone cold, but she held it anyway, savoring the comfort of the ritual. The flames hissed and popped, their glow painting her pale face in shades of gold and shadow. Her life had been reduced to this quiet survival, silence as both shield and companion. Selene was not ignorant of the world beyond the forest. She had fled it deliberately. The villagers had whispered names behind her back, witch, half-blood, cursed. Her family had abandoned her before she had even learned what she truly was. And the wolf pack she had once thought hers had turned her away, as though her blood itself were an offense. So she had chosen solitude. Better to be forgotten than despised. Better to fade into obscurity than live as a reminder of rejection. That night, however, her fragile peace was shattered. The first knock nearly tore the door from its hinges. Selene froze, the mug slipping in her hand until tea sloshed across her fingers. She hissed, half in pain, half in disbelief. No one came here. No one even knew this cabin existed, not anymore. The knock came again, louder this time, urgent and desperate. She stood slowly, her body moving before her mind could catch up. Instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to wait it out until whoever it was left. Yet her hand reached for the iron poker leaning against the hearth. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she felt. For a moment, there was nothing, only the roar of the storm. Then, "I mean no harm," a voice answered, low and strained. "I need shelter." Selene's grip tightened around the poker. The voice carried weight, the kind of weight that clung to the air even after the words had faded. It was not the plea of an ordinary traveler. Against her better judgment, she slid the bolt free and pulled open the door. Lightning flashed, illuminating the figure on her threshold. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, his cloak soaked through with rain, plastered against a frame that spoke of power, even in weakness. His skin was pale as moonlight, his hair dark and dripping, his jaw set with iron defiance though his body leaned heavily against the doorframe. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They glowed faintly red, not with the reflection of fire, but from within. A vampire. Every part of Selene screamed at her to slam the door. To run. To fight. But something in his gaze held her frozen. Not hunger, not malice, but exhaustion. Desperation. "My name is Kaelen," he rasped, his voice faltering. "Ebon King. Alpha of the Nightborn. Let me in, or leave me here to die." The storm howled behind him, as though the night itself sought to devour him. Selene stepped aside. And in that instant, her quiet, forgotten life ended forever. The moment Kaelen crossed her threshold, the air changed. It was no longer just her cabin. It belonged to his presence now, dark, commanding, filling every corner like shadow creeping into flame. His boots dragged streaks of mud and blood across the floor before he collapsed into the worn chair near the fire. The cloak slipped away, revealing the extent of his wounds. Selene's heart clenched. His shirt was shredded across the chest, soaked in blood so dark it gleamed black. Jagged gashes tore through his flesh, wounds that seemed to knit themselves together only to split open again, fighting against some unseen poison. Selene swallowed hard. She had seen injuries before, hunts gone wrong, accidents in the woods, but never this. Why here? She asked quietly. Kaelen lifted his head, eyes glowing faintly crimson in the firelight. Because your home is hidden, unmarked. No trails for the sanctum to follow. The sanctum? He grimaced, breath shallow. Hunters. Fanatics. They will burn villages to the ground if they believe I hide there. Selene's chest tightened. She had chosen this place precisely because it was forgotten. Invisible. And now. You should leave, she whispered, though even as she said it, she knew he couldn't. Kaelen's gaze burned into hers, sharp and unrelenting. I cannot. Not yet. Something tells me I was meant to find you. Her breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to throw him out into the storm. Yet some traitorous part of her stirred at his words. The storm had not yet passed when the pounding came again, this time not at her will, but at her door. Selene's chest seized. Kaelen's eyes snapped open, glowing bright now, his fangs bared. Stay behind me, he ordered. The door shuddered beneath the force of another blow. We know you're in there, a voice barked, cold and merciless. Kaelen rose, his body trembling but still radiating power. He wrenched the door open. 3 men stood there, cloaked in ash gray, their armor marked with the burning sigil of the sanctum. The one in the center smirked, his gaze sweeping past Kaelen until it landed on Selene. His smile deepened. You've taken shelter with a monster, he said smoothly, his hand tightening on the hilt of his silver blade. Step aside, girl, and we may grant you mercy. Selene's blood ran cold. But Kaelen laughed, a sound dark and dangerous. Mercy, he echoed. You call slaughtering children mercy? The hunter sneered. And what do you call drinking them dry beneath the moon? The air cracked with tension. And when the hunter lunged, steel flashing, the fragile piece of Selene's exile was shattered in a storm of blood and fire. The hunters moved like wolves in formation. One surged for Kaelen, blade flashing in the firelight, while the others darted toward Selene. Selene's body reacted before her mind could. She stumbled back, clutching the iron poker, heart hammering so violently she could hear the blood in her ears. The hunter's blade slashed down, splitting the table in two where she had stood an instant before. Splinters burst across the cabin. Kaelen moved like a storm. Even weakened, his body blurred into shadow. His clawed hand caught the hunter's wrist mid-strike and twisted. Bone cracked with a sound that made Selene's stomach churn. He slammed the man into the wall, the stones groaning from the impact. But the second hunter had already closed the gap to Selene. His eyes gleamed with fanatic hatred, the silver of his blade thirsting for her skin. She raised the poker uselessly. Fear made her limbs heavy, clumsy. The strike came down. And then something broke loose inside her. A surge of heat rushed from her chest to her hands. Her vision flared white. A shockwave burst outward, invisible yet undeniable, hurling the hunter back against the wall with a cry. His blade clattered to the floor. Selene stood frozen, her hands trembling, light still flickering faintly across her fingertips like white fire. The smell of scorched fabric and burned flesh filled the air. Kaelen turned, his crimson eyes wide, not with anger, but recognition. Selene, he growled, his voice low and sharp. Control it. I don't know what I did, she whispered, her chest heaving. The last hunter roared, charging straight at her. Instinct surged again. She thrust out her hands, and a blinding flare of energy erupted from her palms, slamming into him with such force that he crashed through the cabin door and tumbled into the storm outside. The silence that followed was broken only by the howl of the wind and Selene's ragged breathing. Kaelen stepped toward her slowly, studying her with an intensity that rooted her to the floor. His voice was rough, reverent. You're not just a forgotten exile, he said. You're blood-marked, light-born. Selene staggered back, shaking her head. No. None of this. His hand closed gently but firmly around her wrist, steadying her trembling fingers. His touch was fire and ice, strength and promise. You don't understand yet, Kaelen said. But I do. And if you stay here, The sanctum will return with 100 more blades. Selene swallowed hard, fear nodding with something else, something dangerously close to exhilaration. Then what happens now? She whispered. Kaelen's crimson gaze blazed. Now you come with me. The journey to the stronghold carved through the forest like a nightmare. The storm had passed, leaving the woods dripping with rain, branches heavy and silent as though holding their breath. Kaelen moved ahead of her with uncanny grace despite his wounds, each step sure and silent. Selene followed, her mind spinning with questions she dared not voice. What was she? What had she unleashed in her cabin? And why had fate bound her to this vampire king of all beings? By dawn, the trees thinned to reveal a mountain range jutting into the sky like blackened teeth. A hidden path wound upward, narrow and treacherous, until at last it opened into a clearing. The stronghold loomed before her. Carved directly into the mountainside, its spires rose like claws of stone and shadow. Balconies jutted over the cliff, their railings wrought in iron, and the banners that hung from the towers were black as midnight, stitched with silver threads that shimmered faintly in the mist. Selene's stomach twisted. This was not a place built for comfort. It was built for power. Guards stood at the gate, tall and pale, eyes glowing faintly in the dawn light. Their gazes snapped to Selene the moment she appeared at Kaelen's side. She's human, one muttered. She's with me, Kaelen said, his voice iron and final. The guards lowered their heads immediately, but their stares lingered on her with suspicion sharp enough to cut. Inside, the stronghold pulsed with life. Shadows moved like living things in the corners, whispers echoing along the endless stone corridors. Vampires of every shape and stature turned their eyes toward her, some with open curiosity, others with disdain. Kaelen led her through it all, his presence a shield as much as a command. At last they stopped in a vast chamber at the heart of the stronghold. Pale moonlight filtered through narrow windows, casting silver over the polished stone floor. This is where you'll train, Kaelen said. His gaze flicked to her hands. Your power is raw, untamed. If you don't master it, it will consume you. Or worse, be used against you. Selene wrapped her arms around herself. I don't even know what I am. Kaelen stepped closer, his voice lowering. You are Lightborn, Selene, descendant of the seers. Your kind was thought lost, purged centuries ago. The sanctum hunts your bloodline because it is the only thing they fear. Her pulse hammered. Why fear me? I can barely control it. Because when you can, he said softly, no darkness can stand against you. The weight of his words settled deep in her chest, equal parts terrifying and intoxicating. Selene met his gaze, and for the first time since he'd stormed into her life, she realized that Kaelen didn't just see her as a frightened exile. He saw her as something more, something destined. Days passed in relentless rhythm. Training at dawn, meditation at dusk. Kaelen pushed her to exhaustion, forcing her to summon the energy until her body shook, forcing her to channel it until her hands glowed with steady white fire. You're holding back, he growled one morning as she struggled to lift a boulder with her power. You fear it. Fear makes it wild. Trust it, trust yourself. Selene grit her teeth, sweat dripping down her temple. She thrust her hands outward, and the stone lifted, trembling in the air. When she released it, it crashed down so hard the ground shook beneath their feet. Kaelen's lips curved faintly, pride flickering in his crimson eyes. Better. But not all in the stronghold were impressed. Whispers followed her everywhere. Some called her cursed. Others muttered that the king was blinded by infatuation. And when she passed in the hall, she felt the weight of gazes that wished her gone. The breaking point came in the great hall. Kaelen had summoned the clan for council, but the moment Selene entered at his side, murmurs rippled like a wave. A tall, gaunt vampire with eyes black as obsidian sneered openly. So this is the mortal you shelter, he said. The Ebon King has grown desperate indeed. Selene's stomach dropped. The man's aura pressed on her chest like a storm cloud. Before Kaelen could speak, she found her voice, quiet but steady. I'm not mortal. The hall went silent. The gaunt vampire tilted his head, his sneer deepening. Then prove it. A circle was cleared. The clan crowded close, their whispers sharp as knives. Selene stepped forward on trembling legs, Kaelen's crimson gaze burning into her back. You don't have to do this, he murmured, too low for the others to hear. Yes, I do, she whispered back. The gaunt vampire shed his cloak, his body wiry but coiled with lethal power. One strike, girl, he taunted. Show me you are more than a shadow in his bed. Anger burned hot in her veins, drowning her fear. The duel began in a blur. He lunged, faster than any mortal could follow, his blade gleaming in the torchlight. Selene flung up her hands, and light burst from her palms, forming a shield that rang like steel as his sword glanced off it. The shockwave rippled across the hall, forcing spectators to stumble back. Gasps filled the chamber. Selene's chest heaved, her arms trembling. The gaunt vampire snarled, lunging again. This time, she dropped the shield and thrust outward, unleashing a blast of energy that hurled him across the hall. He slammed into the wall with a crack that echoed like thunder. Silence followed. Selene stood in the center of the hall, her hands still glowing faintly, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Whispers erupted. Lightborn. She's no mortal. The girl carries the seer's blood. Kaelen stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. Does anyone here still doubt her? No one answered. The gaunt vampire staggered to his feet, blood trailing from the corner of his mouth, his black eyes burning with hatred, but also something Selene had not seen before. Fear. The days that followed Selene's duel spread like wildfire through the stronghold. Whispers carried her name across every hall, from the lowest guard to the highest council seat. Some spoke of her with awe, others with envy. But none dared deny what they had seen. Selene was no longer the exile, hiding in a forest. She was Lightborn. Yet recognition brought no safety. Kaelen called his generals to council. The sanctum had grown bold. Villages at the mountain's base had already been razed, their ashes black against the snow. Scouts returned bloodied, speaking of entire legions moving under banners of white flame. They mean to starve us out, one general said grimly. Blockade the mountain passes, cut our supply lines. They will smoke us from the stronghold like vermin. They underestimate us, another snarled. Let us descend upon them before they gather their strength. Kaelen sat silent at the head of the council table, his crimson eyes gleaming. Beside him, Selene kept her head bowed, though every word cut into her like a blade. These weren't abstract strategies. They were death sentences for hundreds, perhaps thousands. At last, Kaelen spoke. His voice carried the weight of stone and storm. We do not cower in our fortress while innocents burn. We meet them in the valley. The generals nodded, though unease lingered in their eyes. Selene touched his arm lightly. You'll be walking into their trap. Kaelen met her gaze, softer now than it had been before the council. Perhaps. But we do not win wars by hiding. And you, he lowered his voice further, so only she could hear, you will stand at my side. Her stomach clenched. I'm not ready. Yes, you are, he said firmly. You proved it in the hall. You will prove it again on the battlefield. The night before the march, Selene could not sleep. She stood on one of the balconies, the cold mountain wind whipping her hair, her hands glowing faintly as she practiced conjuring sparks of light. Each flicker drained her, yet she forced herself to continue. Tomorrow, failure would mean death. When dawn came, the valley below was black with soldiers. The sanctum's banners fluttered like fire against the snow, their chants rolling up the mountainside like thunder. Kaelen led his people out with a roar that shook the earth. Shadows poured from the fortress gates, a tide of night meeting the tide of flame. Selene's heart hammered as she followed, her light burning in her palms like a fragile star. The war of shadows had begun. Battle was chaos. The valley rang with steel, screams, and the hiss of fire meeting shadow. Kaelen was a force of nature. His claws tore through sanctum soldiers as though they were parchment, his presence driving the Nightborn into a frenzy of victory. Selene fought at his side, her light blasting through lines of enemies, each flare searing them where no shadow could shield them. But every use left her weaker, her vision swimming at the edges. Still she pushed on, the memory of her exile burning in her chest. When the sanctum finally broke and fled, the valley was littered with corpses, their banners abandoned in the snow. Victory's cry shook the mountains. But the stronghold would not know peace. That night, when the clans gathered to celebrate, Selene felt the shift. Smiles too sharp, whispers too quick. She caught the gaunt vampire, the one she had humiliated in the duel, watching her with eyes like knives. Later, in the quiet of her chamber, she barely had time to sense the intruder before a blade pressed against her throat. "Did you think we'd bow to you forever, Lightborn?" the gaunt vampire hissed, his fangs bared. "You are not our queen. You are our doom." Selene's blood froze. "If you kill me, Kaelen will. He'll thank me," the vampire spat. "You've bewitched him.
We all see it.
He grows weaker under your shadow. The Ebon King belongs to the night, not to the light." The blade pressed harder. She closed her eyes, calling desperately to the spark within her. But her body trembled, too drained from the battle. Then the chamber door burst open. Kaelen was there, crimson eyes burning like wildfire. In a blur, he ripped the would-be assassin from her, slamming him against the stone wall with enough force to crack the stone. "You dare touch her?" Kaelen's voice shook the chamber, deadly quiet. "She will destroy us all," the vampire gasped, blood dripping from his mouth. "The sanctum fears her, and you invite her into our heart. She will be the end." His words ended in a scream as Kaelen's claws pierced his chest. With a final snarl, Kaelen tore the life from him, the body crumpling to ash at his feet. Silence fell heavy. Selene's breath came fast, her throat still stinging where the blade had pressed. Kaelen turned to her, his face dark with fury, not at her, but at the betrayal festering in his halls. His hands, stained with blood, shook slightly as he reached for her. "They will not touch you again," he vowed. Selene met his gaze, her heart twisting. She wanted to believe him, but for the first time, she saw the truth in the assassin's words. Her presence here was tearing the stronghold apart. The stronghold did not rest after the betrayal. Guards doubled their patrols. Kaelen's counsel fractured further, suspicion festering like a wound. And through it all, Selene felt the weight of eyes wherever she went, some filled with reverence, others with venom. She tried to withdraw, to spare Kaelen the strain, but he would not allow it. Each night he came to her, his presence fierce, unyielding. One evening, as the storm rolled across the mountains, he found her again on the balcony. She stood wrapped in her cloak, staring into the dark horizon. "They hate me," she said softly, her voice nearly lost to the wind. Kaelen stepped beside her, his crimson gaze fixed on the distant lightning. "Let them. Their hate is nothing compared to what hunts us beyond these mountains." Selene turned, her heart aching. "And what about you? Do you hate me for what I've brought to your door?" His hand lifted, brushing against her cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle for one who carried death in his every breath. "Hate you?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Selene, you are the only thing I cannot afford to lose." Her chest tightened. For a moment, the fortress, the sanctum, the war, all of it fell away, leaving only him. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered. "You are," Kaelen said, his eyes burning into hers. "You've survived exile. You've faced hunters, betrayal, war. And still you stand." His hand moved to the back of her neck, drawing her closer. "Stand with me now. Not as exile. Not as captive. As mine." Selene's breath caught. "Yours?" "Say the word," he murmured, his lips inches from hers. "And I will vow it before shadow and flame, before the night itself. You will be my queen, Selene."
My vow.
My light in the dark. For one heartbeat, fear warred with longing. But in the end, her answer was clear. She leaned into him, her lips brushing his. Yes. The kiss was fire and storm, a vow forged not in words but in the fierce, undeniable bond that had been growing between them since the night she opened her door. And in that vow, Selene knew she had chosen her fate, not as a forgotten exile, not as prey, but as the queen of the Ebon King. The fortress had not known silence in years. Not like this. The storm had passed, leaving the mountains veiled in mist. The banners on the spires hung heavy with rain, their silver threads dulled to gray. Yet within the stronghold, a different weight lingered, uneasy, expectant. The clans had gathered at dawn in the great hall. Shadows filled every corner, and torches sputtered against the damp air. The council stood divided, whispers sharp as blades. Some demanded Selene's exile, others her coronation. But all fell quiet when Kaelen entered. He strode through the chamber like a storm-given flesh, his cloak trailing behind him, his crimson gaze daring anyone to defy him. At his side walked Selene, cloaked in black, her hair braided back, her pale face come though her heart thundered in her chest. The murmurs began at once. The Lightborn? She does not belong here. She carries the old blood. Kaelen raised his hand, and silence struck like a blade. Enough, he said. His voice carried, echoing from the stone walls with the weight of command. You doubt her. You fear her. But last night, she stood against the sanctum. Without her light, this hall would already be ash. Some lowered their eyes. Others glared. Kaelen turned, his gaze burning into Selene's. Stand with me. Her breath caught. Every gaze in the hall was upon her, 1,000 judgments pressing down like chains. But she stepped forward anyway, into the circle of light cast by the torches. My name is Selene, she said, her voice steady. For years I hid in exile, forgotten by the world. But I was not broken. I am Lightborn. I carry the blood of seers the sanctum thought destroyed. And I will no longer hide. She lifted her hands. White fire sparked to life in her palms, blazing bright against the darkness. Gasps rippled through the hall, some in awe, some in fear. I do not ask for your trust, she continued, her voice rising. I will earn it. But hear me now, the sanctum will come again. Their armies grow, their flames burn higher. If you cast me out, they will hunt me, and they will come for you all the same. But if I remain, she turned, her gaze finding Kaelen's. Then we stand together, shadow and light, and nothing can break us. The fire in her palms flared, filling the hall with brilliance. For a moment, the night itself seemed to recoil. Silence fell. Then Kaelen stepped into the circle beside her. He reached for her hand, the sight of his dark-clawed fingers entwining with her glowing light, searing itself into the minds of all who watched. She is mine, Kaelen said, his voice low but carrying to every corner. My queen.
My vow.
The sanctum will break before us. Let any who challenge her, challenge me. The words struck like thunder. Some bowed their heads in reluctant acceptance. Others turned away, their eyes still burning with doubt. But none spoke against him. None dared. Selene squeezed Kaelen's hand, her heart trembling. She had not sought this path, yet it had found her all the same. No longer in exile, no longer forgotten. She had chosen. And though war loomed on the horizon, though conspiracies still slithered in the shadows, she felt no fear. For the first time in her life, Selene belonged. That night, as dawn's first light spilled over the mountains, she and Kaelen stood together on the highest balcony. The valley stretched wide below them, mist curling like smoke, the world caught between shadow and sun. This is only the beginning, Kaelen murmured, his gaze on the horizon. Selene leaned against him, her hand still glowing faintly with the spark she no longer feared. Then let it come, she whispered. Whatever dawn brings, we will face it together. And in that moment, as shadow and light mingled in the rising sun, the exile and the king became more than fate had ever intended. They became legend.